You're listening to IOE Insights, the UCL Institute of Education podcast at University College London.
Welcome to the Staffroom. I'm Elaine Long.
And I am Mark Quinn.
We are programme leaders on the UCL Early Career Teacher programme. Why are we in the Staffroom? We're here because this is where the best professional learning conversations always take place. This is where problems faced by teachers and leaders today can be explored critically and where meaningful connections between research and practice can be made.
Over the course of the series, we'll hear the voices of different colleagues as they come into the staff room, from ECTs to academics and executive leaders. We'll talk about all things education, the challenges and the joys. So why don't you enjoy a coffee with us, perhaps even grab a biscuit and sit down for an hour of staff room chat. Welcome to the staff room, Tessa Blair. Dr. Tessa Blair from East London Teaching School Hub. East London Teaching School Hub is one of our oldest partners, isn't it, Tessa, for both ECF programs and NPQ programs from forever, I think. We're really delighted to have you join us in the staff room this morning, Tessa. I've been told that we've got to break out the specialist selection of hot drinks and biscuits for you, because not only are you a very revered expert in the field we're going to talk to you about today, but you're also, I think, the first returnee to our staff room.
Really?
Having been here before, nobody else has ever dared cross the threshold again and sit on one of our comfy chairs. You are the first of perhaps many. So you're especially welcome. But I do need to ask you again, if you want to update your coffee order or your biscuit routine, what can I get you?
Definitely a milky coffee, please. And I fancy a custard cream if you've got one, or a hobnob.
I have both. You can
Lovely.
have both.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe we make that a rule, actually. If you come back into the staff room, you get 2 biscuits, because I think yeah, that's how special you are to us, Tessa. And you wear many hats in your life, as well as being one of our valued delivery partners and working with lots of beginning teachers. We also know you have a strong research background in mentoring, and that's what we want to focus on today. So could you talk us through that a bit?
Yeah, of course. I was really excited when I was preparing the Leading ECT Development Local Learning Community for Mentors recently. I was preparing, looking at all the slide resources, really getting excited about the shape of the new programme. And suddenly I came across one of my old friends, and I was really delighted to see the research framework that Catherine Byrne and Hazel Hager and colleagues had developed, which is described as the Orientations to Learning from Experience framework. There it was, this framework that I'd spent 7 years of my life studying as part of my doctorate. So I was lucky enough to be supervised by Catherine Byrne and colleagues on my doctorate that I worked on part-time just before the start of this programme. So it was great to see that there. And I think what really struck me about that framework when I first came across it, I was an assistant head teacher working in a London secondary school. I was leading professional learning. I was that induction tutor, and I was thinking about how can I create the really positive conditions for learning? How can I create great positive learning cultures? And I came across a graphic. It was actually in a teaching history journal article, so a sort of practitioner journal at that time, and it showed the orientations of learning, so these 5 kind of approaches to learning from experience, and then the context in which the teacher was working. And it had this arresting image. It kind of presented them all as flowers, different states of flowers, of sunflowers. And we had Hanif, who was flourishing because he was in a fantastic culture of learning, and he had a really positive attitude to that learning from experience. But we also had Adam, who was described as sort of stunting, and there was this kind of really sad looking sunflower in the graphic, and Brian, who was wilting. And this really sort of resonated with me and really provoked me, I think, to think about, how could I create these really positive cultures of learning, and how could I support beginning teachers particularly to think about having really positive approaches to learning from experience. Because what we know from teachers, and particularly obviously early career teachers, is that they're learning on the job. Mainly, when we talk to them about how they're learning, they tend to tell us that they're learning through experience, through doing the job. And I want to try and unpack that and break that down a little bit.
And in your experience, have you come across many wilting Bryans and flourishing Hanaths, and what does that sort of look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that it's a really challenging thing to do, learning teaching, and that the process, is very complicated. We've got a mixture of kind of individual approaches, but then the professional learning culture really does make a difference. And that comes out in your research too, doesn't it, at UCL, in terms of the work you've been doing around the early career framework, in terms of those kind of relational, the relational relationships essentially that we have, and the mentor and the ECT or beginning teacher are really, really key to that. I think the thing that kind of really struck me about the research that was there, this work that was done mainly in the 1990s, working with beginning teachers, was that one of their concluding comments, they said, if teachers' orientations to learning are amenable to change, then they need the time, space, and encouragement to articulate and critically examine the processes of learning to teach, and that mentors were the best place to do that. And I just felt it was like a real call to arms for me. I thought, great, okay, that's where I'm going to pick up this research. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to think about whether I can, how can I create the time, space, and give opportunity to think about the processes of learning to teach, and how might mentors be involved in that process. So sort of taking this framework, which was essentially a kind of descriptive research tool, and making it into a kind of formative intervention tool. So saying, what can we do with it in a kind of action research approach? How can we use this to improve beginning teachers' experiences so that we have less wilting and stunted teachers? Because I felt really sad, this idea that kind of you could end a research project and describe teachers to be in that place at the end.
Yeah. So beyond the metaphor, Tessa, of the wilting and the stunting and the stunted sunflower, if we focus just for a moment on those challenges, on the psychological challenges that ECTs face in their orientations to learning, what have you seen is sort of, if you like, in actual terms, those psychological challenges for ECTs, and what's the and as you described that, what is the role of mentors when facing those challenges with their ECTs?
Yeah, and we know learning teaching is challenging, and I think it's worth picking up that there are real practical, physical, financial challenges that our early career teachers are facing too. So in terms of my current role with with ECTs, I'm the appropriate body lead, and I'm often picking up challenges around the sort of financial hardships, ECTs facing housing challenges, homelessness, even, that should really affect their progress through the programme. And as we increase the diversity of our ECT workforce, rightly so, I think there are challenges for our schools too, in terms of thinking about how we can ensure we have really inclusive cultures for all of our early career teachers, those ECTs from all backgrounds, and including those with disabilities or with SEND themselves, can really flourish within the profession. In terms of the kind of emotional or psychological issues, things that particularly picked up were where ECTs were mentored by people who were also their line manager, or in my context, in the secondary context, but we know this often happens in terms of phase leaders at primary as well. And I was really delighted, to see in that statutory guidance the expectation there is this separation now of role between the mentor and the induction tutor, that separation of the kind of developmental support and the assessment processes, because often we saw in departments where they were the line manager and the mentor, the kind of management targets sneaking through into the focus and prioritization. And we know, and you've advocated really strongly for the kind of the risks of judge mentoring and that comes with that, and the value of being on side in terms of that. I think recognizing that for trainees, beginning teachers, early career teachers, that this really matters to them. I think, all of the teachers I worked with in my study and have had really high expectations for themselves, high aspirations for the learners they work with and for themselves. And that means they can put a lot of pressure on themselves to perform like a teacher. And when we have cultures of accountability, high stakes observation processes, the loom of Ofsted, that can really put incredible pressure on our early career teachers. So I think mentors really need to think about, how can they create that emotionally safe place to risk learning something as hard as teaching. And so I sort of drew on in my research these ideas of how can we build self-efficacy for early career or for beginning teachers in my case, but for early career teachers, how can we ensure that we're building on those really positive experiences? I think strengths-based mentoring can be really powerful. Actually thinking, what went well and how are you going to build on this, rather than the sort of traditional sort of deficit approach of having a very cursory minute on the what went well and then let's focus on what next.
So can I just ask you, I'd interrupt you just for a second, because I know that you, particularly in East London, you've done a lot of work face-to-face with mentors, digging into their own independent learning from the programme, as we've had before. So you've had opportunities, I guess, to talk more directly to mentors than maybe happens elsewhere in the country. When you're talking to mentors about these psychological challenges that ECTs face and the behaviours that it comes out in the behaviours of their ECTs, what sorts of things are you alerting your mentors to? What are you asking them to look out for?
Well, it can present itself in any way, can't it? As it can in the classroom, with our learners. We'll have the overwork and anxiety. We'll have also the kind of withdrawal, that kind of passive withdrawal of effort that can tap into a sort of a lack of confidence or a lack of self-esteem. I think, it really presents itself in different ways, but I think it is about being available to your early career teacher and being responsive to them and listening to them. So we know about the value of those high quality dialogues. You've talked about that a lot in your fundamentals of mentoring, and ensuring that we're eliciting from our teachers where they're at and what their thinking is, and trying to understand their perspective, because we know that teachers come into schools with really powerful ideas, and to shift those, to change them or to build on them, we need to understand them, just as we do with the learners in the classroom. So careful questioning, I think really careful questioning can really help to understand where those ECTs are at.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when we think about the role of the mentor, it has shifted a lot, and there are much higher expectations on mentoring. Because I think in the past it used to be sort of this support mechanism to bestow your experience and wisdom on people. Now the expectations are much more to pedagogically mentor. But I think even in this discussion, it's shifting the thinking even further to say that a mentor has to be really skilled at dialogue and has to be able to surface ECT's thoughts and feelings and their emotional world and help them to manage it. And I think it's really fascinating and incredibly complex and incredibly challenging, but a really interesting discussion. And one finding from research conducted by Burns and colleagues is exactly that. I think that we need to support ECTs to be effective learners as well as effective teachers. You use the expression, I really like the expression, learning teaching is challenging. You don't often hear that expression, do you? You don't often hear people say you're learning teaching, but that's what early career teachers are. So in your experience, if we are to take that research and think about, well, we need to support ECTs to be effective learners as well as effective teachers, because they are learning, teaching, how can mentors support them to develop that dual identity? Because it's a hard thing to do practically, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really important, that focus on dual identity, because we know that teachers often focus on their students' needs above their own needs. And that's particularly important, true if they're an early career teacher, they're an employed teacher. There's often a sense that, now they're a real teacher and they need to do what real teachers do and sort of get on with it. And they eschew their learning identity. And actually, when we look at those early models in the past, you've probably seen them of kind of how teachers learn. They'll often talk about, that the teachers are concerned with themselves initially, and then their area of concern kind of broadens out. But most of the research doesn't show that. Most teachers, even from the very earliest stage of their initial teacher education, are thinking about the learners really strongly, and this comes out really clearly. But that puts a huge pressure on them, and as I say, they sort of forget their own identity as a learner. So I think one of the most basic things that mentors can do, and all of us should be doing, is thinking actually about the process of learning to teach. How do we learn to teach, and having a language for that and being explicit about that. Because too often teachers, and I think teacher educators, including mentors, think that it can just happen through experience alone. And there's not a kind of, we're not clear about the kind of pedagogies of teacher learning, or the processes that are happening. And of course, I would argue that this framework is a helpful tool for that, because it starts to get you to think about, these 5 dimensions in terms of, intentionality, or attitudes to context, or the frame of reference. Where are you on these dimensions, and what does that look like, and what might it take to move a step forward in terms of these 5 dimensions? So when in my research, when I used that with mentors and beginning teachers, they found it a really powerful tool to get them talking about the processes of learning to teach. They said that it gave them a language to talk about something that hadn't really been talked about, and to think about the source of knowledge they were drawing on, to think about how intentional or deliberative they're being. And that can really support that self-regulation for both, the teacher themselves and the mentor. I think I really sort of frame it in terms of that co-regulation, self-regulation being about drawing on all the resources around you. We know there's lots of focus on target setting in initial teacher education and in early career teacher development, but we also know that workplace learning is often unplanned, and actually teachers can learn a lot from doing the job, from those workplace activities, if they engage in those metacognitive processes. So if they review and evaluate and they plan for future action. And so I think we've used in the past the language kind of reflective practitioner, reflection, and reflection became almost an unhelpful term because it had so many different definitions. We were asking for so much within it. But, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That review, that evaluation is really key. And I think, all the sort of, if we think about the language of metacognition and self-regulation, I think that could be really powerful in terms of what we're asking our beginning to teachers to do. And I think we're all being encouraged to do this more. So I think the core content framework, which has now become obviously the ITT ECF framework, had in it, didn't it, the kind of types of activities, the types of pedagogies or approaches, discuss with expert teachers or observe and deconstruct. I think that's helped us to sort of understand how learning might happen and who might be involved in it. And as you said, Elaine, that the sort of the framework itself and the UCL program has really raised the expectations for what mentors should know and allowed them to see themselves as learners. Lots of our mentors are learning alongside the early career teachers, aren't they? That focus on educative mentoring, on co-learning and co-inquiry really pushes us away from that old model of kind of expert novice. And I think that allows them to avoid the temptation to rush to act like a teacher who isn't constantly evaluating or adapting or refining their practice. So if mentors can, model that learning, I think that's really key, and think aloud, and show their learning as well, then ECTs can really see how to think like a teacher. And one of the mentors I must have did this really well. They talked aloud their decisions really powerfully. but they also importantly encourage the trainee to experiment. So, have a go, recognizing that there isn't only one solution to any problem, and really encouraging that adaptive expertise, I guess.
So many interesting. Oh, sorry, Mark.
No, you go ahead, Elaine. Go ahead.
I was just saying, so many interesting things to follow up from that. I was just interested in hearing a bit more about your research first, though, and what you did in your study and what you found out.
Yeah. So I took the framework, the Orientation to Learning from Experience framework, and really the key question was about, how could this be used by mentors and, in my case, employment-based beginning teachers as a tool to support their learning. And I collected data over 3 years. There were sort of different phases to the research, but the first stage was really exploring the conversations that beginning teachers and mentors had, and thinking about whether they were rich enough and whether they gave us the space to collect data to enable us to think about where beginning teachers were in terms of those 5 dimensions. So, how intentional are the beginning teachers in the conversation? What are the frames of reference they're drawing on? What's the attitude to context that they're revealing through those mentoring conversations? Because, of course, the original research had been based on a research interview, so academics coming in and talking to beginning teachers, whereas I felt actually these good mentoring conversations are really rich in this type of discussion about reviewing learning and planning learning. The sort of second phase was then to work with a group of beginning teachers and their mentors who were incredibly generous in their work with me. We framed it as participatory research, and they not only recorded their conversations, but then allowed me to analyze them, make sense of them, and then present back to them some of the some interpretations of their research. So what I did was I did in different ways, but for example, I gave them presentations of where I thought they were based on that conversation alone in terms of the orientation. So I'd give them a sort of map of where they were, or I give them a pen portrait describing their orientation to learning based on that conversation. This is where I think this beginning teacher is, and we used third person. They all got to choose their own pseudonyms, and putting in the third person seemed to really help, because then it helped them to sort of think about this other person that was based on their data. It's very much around recognizing that a mentoring conversations is just a snapshot, but I really saw it as a stimulus to get them to talk about the process of learning to teach, talk about what was happening in those conversations. I recorded that conversation. So when I shared their the representations back with them, we described it as kind of mirror data, which are ethnographically derived bits of data describing what was going on in terms of their learning. When I shared that back with them, I asked them a series of questions again, and again we recorded that conversation. That conversation was then transcribed and analysed. It's layer upon layer. And what I was really looking at is how whether the tool could be used, whether it was helpful to them, whether it got them starting to think about the process of learning to teach. And then over time, so I did this over 2 academic years, sort of through a year and then into the next term of their NQT year, as it was then. Did we see any sort of change? Were they using the tool to actually change their learning? What approaches did they take? And the mentors I worked with, the beginning teachers worked with, they were particularly interested in the frame of reference dimension, because they recognised that they were tending to draw on experience alone, and actually there wasn't a broad range of references and sources that they were bringing into conversations. So they were really interested in that. Different groups approached it in different ways, and it was really interesting. So my sort of findings were really around, yes, the tool can be used in mentor and beginning teacher conversations. So actually mentor conversations are really rich places to talk about and think about the and then I looked at 5 conditions that support intentionality. So what can we do to support more deliberative approaches to learning from teaching? Looking at the range of sources that beginning teachers can use, and how to support that. There were some challenges there. To Have I given you enough, Elaine?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And where there was intentionality and where there was this deliberate focus on promoting effective orientations to learning and self-efficacy, what did that look like in the conversations?
Yeah. So I argued that there were sort of 5 conditions that supported intentionality. So, I mean, one of them is really obvious. It's just that there is a valuing of intentional learning, essentially, that the conversation was seen as an opportunity to plan learning and for that kind of active retrospection. So the idea of, reviewing and evaluating unplanned learning, your marking that you've done, the planning that you've done, that you don't see as a learning activity necessarily, but actually can become a learning activity if thought about with others. So that's the first thing, that it was valued and it's seen. Gone are the days, I think, largely of mental conversations being that kind of cup of tea and, how did you get on? There's a place for that. We talk about the value of well-being and checking in, but it's so much more than that now. We've got a purpose and we really value it as a place for learning. The second sort of condition was that the beginning teacher had a really active and agentic role in the conversation. So, they had some autonomy. So they might initiate the agenda, they might make suggestions. There was a degree of self-regulation. But if they weren't at that stage yet, actually, they were just given space to talk and their voice was heard. So, in some of the conversations where there was really low intentionality, the mentor tended to dominate the conversation. It was all about the kind of mentor show. This is what you need to do, and here you need to do this, and here's your feedback. Whereas in highly intentional conversations, the ECT was setting the agenda, they're leading that target setting, they're really clear about what they're trying to do. And I want to be clear that, I'll talk about that in a moment, actually, a little bit. But, I did a lot of stuff around kind of word counts. They're a bit of a crude way to evaluate the mental contributions, because it is what you do with the words that count. But in the conversations that featured high levels of intentionality, the mentor's words did count for less than 50%, of the words. And that's a sort of basic thing that mentors could do, transcribe a conversation and just do that basic word count and look at that. The third factor was around self-efficacy. Elaine, you mentioned that. So, the beginning teacher or the early career teacher feels they can achieve the target and that will actually lead to an impact in terms of improvement in the classroom. And so conversations with high intentionality really brimmed with that sense of high self-efficacy. And I drew on Bandura's work to look at, what are the 4 sources of that. So, it's around the feeling of the encouragement that a mentor can give. So we know that in less intentional conversations, the beginning teachers, describe feeling quite deflated or anxious or worried about it not going well. But in the more intentional conversations, they felt they could do it, and they were encouraged to do that. They were the positive mastery experiences were drawn on and promoted and supported. They were so they had the opportunity to kind of build that self-efficacy. 4th, I talked about identifying specific and action-based targets directly linked to the evidence of practice. That's where, a mentor going in and describing where an early career teacher is in terms of that sort of those descriptive observations. There's some great, I love the slide in the mental development module, leading ECT development, with a sort of descriptive observation data versus the evaluative data. That was really powerful. It's a really basic thing, but really key, that is based on the reality of what's going on, and then those targets can become really specific and action based, and we'll know what it's going to look like in practice. So we know that there's lots of models around at the moment. Deliberate practice is really powerful, really popular within schools at the moment. But that where there were models of identifying powerful action-based targets, there was higher intentionality. And the final thing, I think, is around that the sort of complexity that we keep talking about. But the mentor recognizing that actually judgments are required in teaching, and encouraging the beginning teachers to have the confidence in developing their judgments and taking risks. So really developing that preparation for adaptive expertise. So in conversations with high intentionality. They were not just given sort of concrete drills to rehearse, but they were developing their own judgment. They were talking about their thinking. They were making their own decisions. They were taking risks and experimenting. And mentors were really able to do that, by sort of, they might share an idea and a suggestion for practice, but they would acknowledge that it was difficult. These are not easy decisions. There were always trade-offs, or they might say, experiment with this or have a go with this.
I wish I'd read your dissertation before we got to.
I know. I really want to read it. I really want to read it too. Will you share it with us, Tessa?
Yeah.
I think I'm at a point where I can now share it. It's not.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. It's in hardback, is it?
Not been published, but in terms of that, those last 5 ideas there, because that's those 5 ideas I did manage to publish in an article in Chartered College Teaching, so in the Impact Journal. It's my only bit of published work. Managed to sneak that out before early career teacher stuff really hit off. But yeah, that article's there. Well, so that's a nice 9-minute read.
I actually remember it, Tessa.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember, in fact, I meeting you about 5 years ago, in fact, and talking to you about that, about your own study, and about people that you've been reading and being inspired by around mentoring, and really enjoying the conversation, because it made me actually have to think really hard about how we construct our program for mentors as well as for early career teachers. So I kind of joked a moment ago about wishing I had read your thesis on this. But in fact, I would say that, I would hope you would feel that there are parts of our program and the way it's structured, maybe some of the language of the program, the way we talk about the program. I should say programs, of course, because it's for early career teachers and for mentors, that somehow do reflect some of your own thinking and some of your own work on this. And actually, I'd just sort of maybe push that back at you. Can you, when you think about our programs, and I should say to people listening, I actually don't think there's a person in the world who knows our programs better than Tessa Blair. But when you think about our programs for ECTs and for mentors, can you point at things within the programs which you say, okay, that's about intentional conversations, or that's about an orientation to learning from experience, or whatever?
Absolutely. I mean, the program's rich in bits that are really powerful, I think, and I can link them to the framework because that's close to my heart. But if we think about frame of reference, for example, I think all of the early career teacher programs, but particularly UCL's, which is rooted in a research rich institution, has you have the research and practice summaries, and then the theory into practice. So you're scaffolding that process of engaging with a wide range of sources. The program itself, the mentor, the facilitated learning, all become different sources of learning for the early career teacher, and the program supports them to make sense of and draw on them through the program that's structured. In terms of intentionality, you've got the powerful module audits, in terms of that, analysis of where we're at, and thinking really purposefully about what our intentions are in our learning. What are we going to prioritize? Where do we spend more time? Which bits are more relevant to me? Recognizing that early career teachers will be at different places, and we do need that flexibility, that tailoring that's really important for them. In those are two things. I think the main thing, though, is actually recognizing that there's a job for mentors to do, in terms of, we know that mentors really value the opportunity to think about their own pedagogy, the pedagogy of mentoring that hasn't always been there, and for it to be so richly informed by research, I think is fantastic. Caroline Daly was my external examiner. So I love her work too. All the work around educative mentoring I drew on in my thesis too. Hobson's work on onside mentoring, judge mentoring. These are all really powerful concepts that I drew on within my research too. So there's so much there.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned educative mentoring and our onside mentoring approaches, and we do say quite explicitly to our mentors that we want them to avoid what we think of as a trap, really, which is of always providing the answers, always providing the solutions to the myriad problems that an ECT will bring to them. Because it is a trap, isn't it? Because it does feel it's seductive. Because I'm a mentor, I am more experienced. I might actually have in my head a solution to the problem that the ECT is bringing. I've had the same problem. I've worked it through. Can you talk about why that is a trap? Why that is a thing that mentors, if they can, should seek to avoid? Why it actually helps the ECT in the longer run if the mentor doesn't just always offer those recipes, all those solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all been in that position, haven't we, where we've tried really hard to sort of bite our tongues and not share it. And Catherine Byrne talks about those sort of the problems of rules of thumb, as she describes it, without the sort of deeper knowledge underneath. I think it's worth acknowledging that it is really helpful for early career teachers, beginning teachers, to have some recipes, some scripts, some templates in that novice stage, or when they're under pressure. And again, I think, mentors being responsive and recognizing what an ECT needs in that moment. And I always joke with the mentors that, we don't need a coaching conversation about how to use a photocopier. Mentors need to be adaptive and use the right tool at the right time. But, in terms of the risks, I think one risk that's often not talked about is that learning and teaching becomes too simplistic, actually. And teachers actually plateau at a kind of competent stage where they can do the moves. Learning happens. It's quite functional. They become quite competent in some ways, but they get bored and leave because they're not engaging intellectually. And I've seen that where early career teachers sort of feel they can do it, and actually they feel like it's repetitive and that it's not engaging them. Because really good teaching should require, the thinking and judgment. Teaching is an intellectual activity, I think, and enjoying that, embracing that, I think, is key. At the other end, we know there's a risk of kind of lethal mutations, isn't there? So we've all seen the lollipop sticks thrown out as a sort of assessment for learning activity without an understanding of what we're trying to achieve through that. Or I often see, a focus on really powerful dialogic questioning in a 5-minute starter recall activity, rather than thinking about, what's the purpose of strategic questioning and what questions do we ask when. We know that we're preparing early career teachers to really thrive in their careers beyond the particular context they're working with. And I think that's the key reason why it's important, because, not only might they move schools, we hope they'll all stay, within East London, but we are preparing them for the wider context. But, children change and technology changes and the world changes. So, even within the last 5 years of the programme, we've had to think about, increase in identification of children with SEND, that plethora of issues around social anxiety or emotional regulation. That's creating new challenges that our teachers need to be able to address. And so they need to know how to learn and how to solve problems ongoing. We've got AI, obviously, as a new challenge for us all to get our heads around. So like all scaffolds, really, if we think about it, these rules of thumb, these templates, these ingredients, these recipes, they're a form of scaffold, aren't they, for a novice? They need to be taken away gradually at the right time, and really with sort of thoughtful attention to the rationale, to that underlying basis, to support that adaptive expertise that we want for all of our teachers in the long term.
Just talk us through, I've heard you use the word adaptive expertise a lot of times. I think it's interesting. Talk us through what that means to you, adaptive expertise, and why it's important that teachers have it.
Thank you for pushing like that. I'm like, quick, find the reference. Yeah. At its basic terms, it's about that sort of fluency in judgment and sort of, having that professional judgment to be able to make decisions in the moment. So, rather than relying on those scripts. So the lovely diagram I can see in my mind, I think it's Soslau now, has the, you know, the corridor of adaptive expertise, and that's in the sort of far right corner. At the bottom, you've got that sort of novice following the scripts and the routines and the recipes there. So it really is around, you know, bringing together all the forms of professional knowledge, professional judgment that our teacher might have, you know, drawing on their understanding of themselves as teachers, their children that they're working with, the curriculum content, the pedagogy, the research, you know, everything, all that professional judgment, which is really braided and really, you know, complex and brilliant, into situations to be able to make the best informed decision in that moment.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear your definition of it, because I think I agree with you. It's so important, and especially when we're thinking about what inclusive teaching is, it's very hard for teachers to create inclusive classrooms if they are just following a recipe and that they don't have that adaptive expertise. On that note then, how do mentors support ECTs to develop that? Because we've talked about the fact that the recipes are good, we have to be practical, ECTs need scaffolds at the start of their career, but you've also talked about probably one of the best ways for mentors to work with ECTs is that more metacognitive approach of thinking aloud about their experience. But even that is complicated, because when you're really good at something, you tend to do it automatically. So you can say what the rule of thumb is, but you don't know really the steps that underpin that or how to codify it. So in your experience, and you will have seen a lot of mentors at work, both in terms of your study, but also just being on the ground in schools in your role, what do the best mentors do to help make their expertise accessible to ECTs?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the point you made there about, you know, how do we tap into their thinking, it is important. But what we also know is that mentors will talk in terms of rules of thumb, but they'll also talk in terms of espoused theories. They'll talk about the things that I think they should say rather than actually what they do. So really getting into a mentor's head or a more expert teacher's head can be really difficult. So I think firstly, mentors need to be open to that, you know, sort of open to being asked, open to, you know, sort of vulnerable and accessible, I guess, in terms of their thinking, sort of not feel challenged or defensive in terms of their approaches. And so I think I always encourage teachers when they're talking to expert teachers and more experienced colleagues and trying to get into their head, that they think about it in terms of thinking and decision making, and that idea of sort of professional judgment. So rather than asking, you know, why did you do that? Because that's really the question they want to understand, but ask, you know, can you tell me about your decision to ... or what was your thinking at this point? Because actually, I think, you know, it's okay. You know, that's an easier question, isn't it? Kind of rather than getting to the kind of that why, which can often set mentors up for quite defensive or you know, giving the right answer essentially. Two sort of most powerful activities, I think, are shared planning. So actually planning together, which is really hard to do, but it is, you know, in terms of the time available, it's great to see that it is there through the UCL program in terms of, you know, perhaps the ECT doing a bit of planning and then coming and sharing that. The mentor can, of course, do that as well, sort of talk aloud their planning. So actually having conversations before an observation can be really powerful too, in terms of unpacking the thinking and the planning. And then doing that sort of deconstruction after an observation as well. So opportunity to observe the mentor and then have that conversation where the mentor models that sort of reflective evaluation. You know, this is what I intended, this is what happened, this is, you know, and doing that sort of evaluation, this is what I might need to do next. I think what's also really important is, of course, that mentors tap into the beginning teacher's way of thinking. So actually just checking in on what they're hearing and what they're understanding from what they've seen. So it's very easy for us to assume that our beginning teachers are seeing the same things that we are as expert teachers. And actually what we know about observations is that it's really hard, that this classrooms are complex, and beginning teachers and novices don't always see the same thing as more experienced teachers. There's a lot of research around that. So actually really focusing on the observations, just checking in on what did you notice, what did you see, and sort of, observing together, noticing together, and unpacking that is really key. And that's true generally in every conversation, isn't it? So eliciting the ECT's perspective, their sense making, what conceptions of teaching are they coming with? Because quite often, going back to that idea of sort of more judgmental observation, the mentor has a preconception about what the beginning teacher is trying to achieve. And actually, beginning teachers will have thought about what they're doing. They will be trying to do something in that moment. They've got a plan, they've got an idea, they've got a rationale. Might not be the same as the mentors. And so really understanding, what they're trying to do, rather than focusing on that sort of that more directive approach, kind of assuming you understand what the beginning teacher's thinking or what's going on in that classroom. So all the co-inquiry model you've got, the learning conversations work that you're advocating through the mentor development program, I think all of those things are really powerful to create those powerful dialogues, essentially those learning conversations.
It's interesting. We sort of ask. The last question was kind of asking you for simple answers, really, wasn't it? What are the things that mentors can do to share their learning or to share their thinking with ECTs? And there are, in a sense, simple things like, well, do some planning together, or have a pre-lesson observation conversation, have a learning conversation afterwards. But in fact, the more you think about any of those activities, the more you realise that they just shine a light on the complexity of the role of the job on how to learn teaching. And I think that's what we should be doing, right? We shouldn't be pretending that this is a simple thing. There might be actually simple, sentence starters we can use when we're just, tell me about your thinking when you were doing this. We can learn how to phrase a question, but actually the thinking behind that and the conversation which will unfold following that question is going to be about the complexity of the decision making. Because why did I teach this? Why did I ask these questions at this moment in the lesson? In fact, there were 4 reasons why I asked those questions. It's not one. There's not a simple single reason. There's
a great article about it's got a great heading, and I can't remember the author. I'll have to look it up, but they talk about keeping it complex, actually. So when we're using rehearsals or approximations of practice, there's often this sort of sense, I think, particularly from academics, that this sort of practice-based learning approach is about simplifying. It's about giving rules of thumb. It's about, almost like cheat sheets. You get this impression. But actually, used well with a rich conversation around decision making, it can be kept complex, because you'll think it, why does this work? Why does it not work? Why is it working here? Why wouldn't it work there?
And by keeping it complex, you're also keeping it open, right? So the decision is never finally made. I made a decision at that moment, and that's, I stuck with it then, but that doesn't mean I'll make the same decision next time.
And I think that helps with the psychological challenges too, in terms of that, the risk of getting it right. So we know that our teachers want to get it right. They want to do the best by their students. If it's seen as a complex thing, a hard thing, a challenging thing, where professional judgment is required, it's okay to, have a different perspective, a different judgment at that point in the lesson. You've got a rationale. You're going to keep on evaluating. You might not do the same thing next week.
Yeah. So I think it's the present continuous is useful, right? We're learning teaching. Means we're continuing to learn how to do this. We haven't ever learned teaching. I think that's probably a helpful orientation, isn't it? Tessa, you've already given us one recommendation for something to read, which is your own Chartered College of Teaching journal article from a few years back. So we're all going to run off and dig up and blow off the dust from our old copies. Anything else? Anything else you think that listeners to this episode might be advised to read when they want to think a bit more about mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots more that could be thought about in terms of the framework that we sort of started the conversation with. And so I think if mentors were inspired to find out more about that, there is a really nice 72-page book that Catherine Byrne and colleagues put out, and it's aimed at practitioners. It's published in 2015. It's called Beginning Teachers Learning, Making Experience Count. It's a short piece, but it goes through the original research and then some recommendations around how we can support beginning teachers learning, and lots of really powerful ideas, I think, really accessibly presented.
You sold me at 72 pages. Tessa, so the rest speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Sadly, we're coming to the end of our biscuit supply, but as you know, before people leave the staff room, we do give everyone a post-it note to write something on. So I'm going to pass yours over, and please could you tell us what you would like to write on it and where you would like to stick it?
I just really encourage, and this is not quite post-it notable, but mentors and or ECTs to have a go at using the framework to think about their approaches to learning from experience. So, where are they on those 5 dimensions in terms of those continuums? What might support them to shift their orientations even more positively towards that? Because I think there's something very powerful in supporting early career teachers to think to that they've got some agency, they've got some a chance to orientate themselves more positively, and actually mentors too can be really powerful in that. So in terms of supporting that learning or and indeed constraining that learning, and if they were feeling even braver, they might record themselves in a mentor meeting and think about it using the framework. Where is the beginning teacher based in that conversation? What is the mentor doing or not doing to support those positive intentions and orientation? So I think my tip would say, have a go at using the tool. Here's the tool, have a go. How might you use this to support your learning?
Thank you.
That I can hear the bell ringing. We have a bell ringing in the staff room even during half term, Tessa.
Cool.
It never stops, but it is telling us that we've come to the end of this episode. You've got to carry whatever remaining custard creams or hobnobs that you haven't eaten. You can take those away with you. We're really grateful once again for your contributions to the Staff Room podcast. Tessa, we'll have you back again, actually, if you don't mind. We wouldn't mind picking up this conversation some future date. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear that. But while we wait for that to happen, we thank you for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your half term, whatever that might be.
Thank you so much, and thank you for indulging me in having a chat about something I'm passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was great.
Our thanks go to Tessa Blair for sharing a coffee and biscuits with us this week in the staff room. Tessa is Deputy Director of the East London Teaching School Hub and their strategic lead for the ECT programme.
Please do get in touch if you'd like to be part of the conversation. Click on the link at the bottom of the UCL Staff Room webpage.
If you've enjoyed this episode, there's more where that came from. Search IOE Insights from wherever you get your podcasts to find episodes of the staff room, as well as more podcasts from the IOE.
And a quick favour before you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd really appreciate it if you could give the IOE podcast a rating. 5 stars would be nice if you're enjoying the show. And that will help us to reach more people who are interested in hearing what the staff room is all about.
Thanks for listening. Search IOE Insights for more podcasts from the IOE.